Okay, welcome, Scott Franklin. Thanks for joining me today, mate. It's great to see you again.
Thanks for having me on. Good to see you too.
It's been a while since we've spoken, and the last time we ran a webinar together about mental health and emotional intelligence and things like that. But since then, it's been a long time in between drinks. And so I really wanted to get you back on as a repeat guest and really go through a bunch of new topics, because in the midst of all of what's going on in the world at the moment, with the turmoil, with the emotions that are running high, with what's happening at the moment, you yourself have had some personal breakthroughs. You've written 2 books within that time, which I believe Limitless and Authentic Goal Setting is another one. So congratulations on those.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So without further ado, let's get into this training because, I think it's a training anyway. I want to talk to you about, because you're a mental health, you're a life coach, you work with mental health, you do emotional coaching and things like that. Your knowledge around this topic is quite vast. And so I want to get an understanding from you what you're seeing around your clients that you see on an everyday basis, what's been happening so far with, in particularly in this tumultuous time where people's emotions are running quite high. What are some of the things that are coming through in your counseling sessions that you're doing?
So the main pattern that I'm starting to see is that before COVID was happening, people were coming in with like a problem or 2 or 3 kind of problems that were happening in their life. But since COVID, it's like their whole life is crumbling in. So they're having problems with mental health, problems with relationships. They're spotting narcissists in their life. They're having problems at work. They're having falling outs with their friends. It's just like everything is hitting them all at once. Mm-hmm. And they're quite unprepared for how to handle it. So a lot of them have gone to see, counselors and psychologists and things like that to try and get that help, which is great. And I encourage those steps there. But they're just not learning the tools they need to be able to control their emotions and how to navigate their way through tricky and challenging relationships at work and at home. Mm-hmm. So people are coming in and there's a lot that I need to be able to help them with in a really short space. So yeah, it's the intensity of it all is higher than usual, and the complexity of it all is a lot greater than usual because there's so many moving bits. And it's about prioritizing their problems from most important to least important, even though they feel like they're all important, and working through them one at a time with a very specific skill set that helps them kind of solve the problems bit by bit. And when we do that, we're able to get through the things, but there's been a lot for them to get through. And I really feel for them because they're coming in feeling quite defeated and quite, almost sunken or beaten from life because it's just been so much happening in such a short amount of time. And even if you look at what's happened in the world in the past 6 to 12 months, more has happened in the past 6 to 12 months than's happened in the last 10 years. And I think that reflects in people's personal lives as well. It's not just 1 or 2 problems. They've got a multitude of problems all happening at once.
Right. So I'm curious to understand from your perspective as to why you think so much is unraveling all at once. I get that there's a lot going on in the world and has been for, like you said, 12 months now. So a lot of upheaval has been happening. But knowing your training as I do, I want to hear your perspective as to why do you think that so many moving parts or so much is unraveling all at the one time for people and they feel like they're sort of coming unstuck?
I think probably for 2 main reasons. The first main reason is things have been swept under the rug for a long time. So people putting off their problems and just go, I'll solve it later, I'll heal it later, or I'll get to it later, or I'll talk to this person later. I think they've just put that off for a really long time. Or the other thing is people are spending more time at home. So they're spending more time with their partners and their kids and their friends. And what's happening is it's bringing a lot of problems to the surface. So that would be the first part, is the things being swept under the rug or spending more time and you're forced to have to face the problem. And then the second part is people thought they were dealing with things, but they really weren't. So what I mean by that is just because you talk about something doesn't mean you're healing it, right? Just because you understand something doesn't mean you heal it. Healing requires deep work that involves your subconscious, which is where all your memories are stored. It's where your imagination is. It's where all your future visions are and things like that. So it's not really brain related. It's more in your subconscious where problematic memories are stored and things like that. That's where the healing actually happens. And I think that's probably the biggest distinction is people think that by talking about something, they're healing it, but really talking about it just strengthens it. If you look at it from an energy point of view, if you talk about something, you're putting energy into it, you're strengthening it. Right. So I'm not saying that don't talk about your problems, but I'm saying if you continually talk about it and that's your only strategy for healing and working through it, it's not going to heal it. You're going to get to a point and then you're going to get stuck. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to go and seek further help to try and understand the problem on a deeper level and maybe get a diagnosis for yourself or for someone else, or try and feel better about the situation. And you'll most likely be encouraged to take medications and things like that. And they'll help you understand your triggers and the kind of the scenarios that are setting you off and things like that. And all of that's important, and you need to do it up to a point. But past that point, you're not going to heal any further. You're going to start to feel stuck. And then you're thinking, well, I'm going to see all these people to get all this help, but I'm not progressing. I'm just talking about the same things over and over. There's no real progression. And that's where your alternative health therapies come in, because they go into this deeper level that isn't talked about in the mainstream mental health and things like that. Yep. And that's where the next level of healing happens. So generally what will happen in this section is you'll start going and accessing memories, right? So there'll be memories of problems that have happened in your life. And what you need to do to heal that memory is you need to correct it, right? So the correction is, if you have a memory of someone disrespecting you, then the correction would be respect, right? Even though that person was never respectful towards you, you can see the life lesson. The life lesson is about respect. And then what you do is you take that lesson and then you imagine that lesson happening in the future. So you imagine yourself surrounded by respectful people, right? So it's that same kind of thing for any problem that you have in life. You go to the memory of the problem and then you correct it and sometimes the correction's for you. Sometimes you need to correct something that you did or something that you said. Sometimes you're correcting the other person. Sometimes you need to correct all the different perspectives. So there's a lot of healing that kind of happens within the one memory. But that's the next level that you need to go into. And you can't do that with your eyes open, with your brain. It's closing your eyes and essentially traveling back in time with your imagination back into these memories. And think of yourself as like the movie director. You're redirecting that movie. You're recreating that scene. And the reason that that's important is because memories are always manifesting into our future, right? So we're always reenacting memories. Whether they're good or they're bad. If they're good memories, we obviously leave those ones alone. But if they're bad, we don't want those repeating in our life, because they will repeat with different people in different scenarios and different situations, but essentially it's the same thing. So that's why it's really important to get into these memories and start correcting them. And this stuff can be taught to kids. Like I've taught this to like 6 and 7-year-old kids. I've taught this to people of all ages. It's not difficult to go into a memory and correct it, to imagine a better scenario, to imagine a better outcome. Or if you're teaching it to a kid, you get them to imagine positive outcomes in their future, right? So, but to get to a point where you do that, you do need to do your counseling and talk to someone about your problems. And you do need to go and see a psychologist so you understand your triggers and your buttons. You need to do all that stuff. I highly recommend you do those steps, because if you haven't done those steps, sometimes it's a bit too deep of a dive to go into these memories and start correcting them, because there can be a bit of a shock factor. If you haven't talked about a traumatic event or something that triggered you in your past, if you've never told a soul about that happening, or you're not comfortable talking to that about someone, then if you try and access that memory on your own too quickly, then you may not be ready. And then you're going to activate fear and you're going to feel scared, and then you're going to put yourself off your healing journey. So I think that there's steps that you need to follow: counseling, psychology, and then your alternative therapy, such as myself. That's probably the main one. So the reason I'm going into that is because I feel this time that we're going through has really highlighted the importance of these steps. Absolutely. And if people skip these steps, they're going to bump into problems.
All right. So there's a lot to unpack there. So before I really want to get into how-to and getting off that ledge that people are on, which is they're just not progressing any further and feel like they're circling around the same life lesson, so to speak, over and over and over again. They feel like they're in this sort of washing machine of rinse and repeat. So before we do that, though, I want to maybe get your understanding as to why it's so important to deal with this emotional side. Because as a guy, I guess that would be a limiting factor in terms of a male's perspective on how to deal with that. I particularly deal with a lot of men in my coaching that are to do with their mental health and their hang-ups with their own emotions, but they really don't know how to process them. I think women have a better understanding intuitively on how to, what they are, or at least identifying and relating to those emotions. So, but it seems to be a topic that is really glossed over. Would you agree? Like when you talk about emotions, people's eyes roll over like, oh, we're getting into emotions now. But it seems to be a very critical part. So why is emotion, or dealing with that emotional trauma, emotional connection, and all of that energy that you spoke about, why is that so important to deal with on as another layer on top of the talking about it and being open about your situations or circumstances or challenges that you're experiencing?
The reason it's important is because emotions are like magnets and they hold problems in place. So they magnetize the way you think. So you keep thinking the same way. Emotions make you act the same way. So despite having thoughts in your head where you want to think differently and you want to act differently, you might be able to do it for a little bit, and then the emotion pulls you back to your old way of thinking and your old way of behaving. And that's where you get men trying to be robust and strong and resilient, and they're trying to just push forward mentally. But the problem is emotions are 40,000 times stronger than your thoughts. 40,000. So it's not even close. It's not even a competition. The emotions are far too powerful. So by putting positive thoughts in, the only time putting positive thoughts in your head is going to work is when you're already calm. If you're already feeling calm and happy and confident and you put a positive thought in your head, then it's going to do something. But the moment you've got stress, anxiety, depression, frustration, upset, any negative emotion, it overrides any positive thought. And then it makes you think thoughts of the same line. So if you're feeling anxious, it puts anxious thoughts into your head. If you're feeling upset, it puts upset thoughts into your head. And it has an unlimited energy supply, which means it doesn't get tired. It's going to be there tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So if you have a negative thought in your head, CBT, which counselors and psychologists will encourage you to do, and I do suggest you learn this. It is good to learn as many things as you can. They'll say that when you get a negative thought in your head, you should challenge it with a more positive and empowering thought, right? And then it should neutralize it and get rid of it, which sounds great, sounds awesome. The problem is that negative thought is coming from an energy supply of that negative emotion, and it just keeps putting negative thoughts there, right? So you need to learn techniques that are able to release the emotion, because what happens is emotions get stuck in our cells. So what happens is the cells hold on to the emotion, and you need a technique that can tell the cells to let go of the emotion, and the emotion can clear out of your system, right? So that's the reason why it's important to understand how powerful these emotions are. They're acting like magnets. But if I can backtrack a little bit and explain where the thinking comes from, if we go into our grandparents' generation, they were the generation of the doers, right? So they're all about doing and not thinking, just do it. And then you go into our parents' generation, they were the thinkers. So they'll be like, well, before you go and do it, let's think about it and see if we can find a better way to do it, right? So they're all the thinkers, and that's where the positive thinking and all that kind of stuff stemmed from, was that generation. Then you come into our generation. We're in the emotion generation. So if it feels good, I'm going to do it. If it doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it, right? So it's very emotion-based. And then if you go into the kids' generation, so kids 21 and younger, they're in the intuitive generation. So they'll say things like, just because something makes you feel good doesn't mean you should do it all the time. Just because eating McDonald's feels good doesn't mean you should do it all the time. Or just because exercise is hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it all the time, right? So the intuitive generation are the most correct, followed by the emotion, followed by thoughts, followed by the physical generation. So when we were growing up, observing our parents and our grandparents, they were very stoic in their nature. They were all about just getting on with it, don't feel it, don't worry about it, just do what you need to do. The problem is in the emotion generation, it's almost like we're wired up a bit differently, and our emotions are more intense to the point where we can't ignore them. You know, we get so depressed that we nearly become suicidal. Our anxiety becomes so bad that we have panic attacks and we end up in hospital. Our confidence is so low that we can't make any good life decisions. Our social anxiety is so bad that we don't know what to say or what to do in social situations. Therefore, we just retreat, isolate, and hibernate. So I think that's where it all stems from. The purpose of our generation is to start to talk about it like we're doing now. So we're creating awareness about it. And then once people are aware about it, their next question is going to be, well, so what do we do next? How do we fix that and how do we solve it?
Wow. That's so powerful, because in my mind, as you were saying that, I started to think about how that generational sort of handing down of the torch, so to speak, has affected my life, and also how the intuitiveness of my children, for example, is in me already. And so I'm kind of been at a tug of war for the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years with embracing that thinking mindset and doing mindset, and then integrating the intuitive side of things as well. So it's been an integration, I guess, of my being. But I can see it with my kids that they've sort of wrestled as well with their intuitive mind that's coming right through, and then also that thinking brain that I'm obviously passing down to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that seems to be something that is an observation of mine that is happening within our generations at the moment. So it's a key thing that is really happening, I think, all over the place. Most people are probably unawares of it, but I think those people that are becoming conscious of the state of the world at the moment and intuitive feeling into certain circumstances, situation, and events, particularly quite prevalent at the moment with what we're going through society-wise. So I think that is something that your critical thinking along with your intuitive ability needs to somehow mesh and intertwine so you can make effective decisions in your life. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. It's one of the main things I've noticed is a skill that that some people lack is like brainstorming thinking. So when you're presented with a problem, you've got to come up with multiple ideas on how to solve it. Whereas what I see is that a lot of people just get told an answer and then they believe it. They don't question it. They don't look for other answers. They're told by someone they believe in or they trust, and they go, well, it must be true. That's it. They don't brainstorm and go, well, other options could be this. It might be that. It might be that. So they're only listening to one side of the story. They're not listening to both sides of the story. So if I can kind of backtrack a little bit again, is when you need to make an important life decision, you should be using your authentic self, right? So some people call it their gut instinct. Some people call it intuition. Some people call it the heart brain. All of that I call the authentic self. And the reason it's important is because it's never wrong, right? So we can ask it questions and it will give us truthful answers. But to be able to access your authentic self, you need to make sure that you don't have any negative thoughts or emotions blocking it, right? So people that have been through any kind of trauma or significant negative events can cause negative emotions, can get stuck and trapped inside their body. And if you have some that are strong enough or you've got enough of them, they build up and they block your authentic self sitting under it, which means you can't access your intuition, which means you become an overthinker or an analyzer. Now, the problem with that is if you're just using your brain, the brain makes errors, right? It's a great calculator. It's great with logical and measurement problems, but it's not good at solving emotion problems, people problems, or life problems. That's what the intuition's there for, right? But a lot of people, they're not accessing it. They're not talking to their intuition, right? So how accurate's their answers, right? So first of all, they've got mental health things going on, which is building up their negative thoughts and emotions. The second thing is they're listening to one side of the story and just believing it at all costs instead of listening to both sides of the story. Because I encourage everyone, listen to both sides of the story, then ask your intuition, your authentic self, what it feels the answer is, right? So you come to your own conclusion. That's what I encourage people to do. But I feel that a lot of people don't have that skill set. And the reason that a lot of people don't have that skill set is because we weren't taught it. You know, our parents didn't have it because they were in the thinking generation. They weren't using their intuition very often to make decisions, if at all. And we weren't taught at school, you know, topics on communication, emotional intelligence, and things like that. You know, the ability to be calm and centered and control your emotions, because you need to be centered and calm to listen to both sides of the story. Otherwise, you'll have an emotional bias to one side or the other. True. So you've got to know how to be emotionally centered and calm. Then you've got to know how to communicate with your authentic self, so you can ask it questions and it gives you answers and you learn how to work with it. Right? So it's almost like you need to understand these things to then be able to have conversations. Whereas what I see people doing is they're not controlling their emotions, they're not talking to their authentic self, and they're going to have conversations in these highly sensitive topics. And that's what I noticed. The thing that really upset me the most when I saw the COVID thing start was how poorly people spoke to each other online. You know, it was disgraceful how they were speaking. And I'm just like, you know, the topic was no longer important. I wasn't even concerned with what they were talking about and who's right and who's wrong. What I was watching for is who's controlling their emotions and who's speaking from their heart. And I don't mean, because sometimes you can get emotions trapped in your heart. You can have anger trapped in your heart. And people go, well, I was talking from my heart. I'm like, no, you're angry, right? Any negative emotion is what I call ego, right? And ego is destructive. Ego will not only sabotage you, but it will sabotage your relationships and it will sabotage anything that you're trying to achieve, right? So just think negative emotions equals ego. Positive emotions equal authentic self. But even when you're feeling positive, you still need to check with your heart and your gut that you're saying the right thing, right? So say, for example, I'm thinking of saying something to you and I'm feeling nice and calm, and then I'm going to say something and I'm feeling good about it. I still need to check in with my heart if what I'm about to say is good or not. And if my heart gives me the all clear, that means I can say it, and that means it's authentic. But if I say it and I don't check in with my heart, technically that's still ego, because I haven't run it through the big boss, right? My heart, my authentic self, that's my big boss, that's my filter. So what I noticed is people aren't running their thoughts through their filter. They're just saying things as they come to their head, and they may be right, sometimes they may be wrong, but some people are coming across as being very righteous.
Yes.
You know, you may be right, you may be, but you're coming across as very righteous, and that puts people off. If you want to create connection and understanding with people, which is the goal, you need to be able to listen with your ears and with your heart. You know, the ears will listen for facts and figures, but the heart listens for vibration and tone and truth and things like that. So, you know, even if we're talking, I may say some things and you might say, oh, well, Scotty, as you're talking, I feel I agree 90% with what you're saying, but there's 10% I disagree with. That's fine. That's your truth. But at least you're using your heart to feel the vibration of what I'm saying, to feel what's true and what's not.
Yes. And not just blindly following that because I like you a lot. Everything that you say is right, or because I highly respect you, or because you're an authority of some kind, then everything that you say is 100% true and factual.
Yeah, that's right. It's like very rarely do humans do anything to 100%, right? So, you know, I really like you and I like a lot of things that you say, but it would be untrue to say I agreed with 100% of every single thing that you say. Mm-hmm. Right? There's got to be a degree. Right? What's that?
At least 99%, yeah.
Well, that's where I was going with it. There's the 0.000.
There's always a room for error, yeah?
You slipped your tongue once and you said the wrong thing, and I'm hanging on to that, and that's the part I'm basing that bit off. Yeah. All
right. Well, let's now circle back to the part where you were talking about that we have a memory, we have an emotion which is linked to a memory, and that memory is of an experience that we had typically in the past, and that could be an hour ago, or it could be 10 years ago, or when you were born, and we've linked that emotional tie towards that particular circumstance and event, and now when we're in a similar type of event or an emotional state, we draw upon that past memory or trigger in order to make certain decisions. And that emotional mind, thought, emotion, heart loop, so to speak, keeps on sort of feeding into itself unless we can go back in there, and you were saying to correct the memory, to kind of rewrite the situation and have apply a new meaning to it, is what I interpreted from you, right?
That's right.
So what I would like to know is maybe just an explanation of the steps. So for example, the first step in my mind would be that you have a negative thought which triggers a negative emotion. Is that the first step?
That's right. That's the first step.
All right. So do you, as an aside, do you think that there's more truth that a negative thought would stimulate a negative emotion, or that you could feel the emotion first, which triggers a negative thought? What's your...
Look, I think they're very tightly linked. You can't have one without the other. But where I would focus with it is that if a person doesn't have a negative emotion in their body, that's a negative thought, that's where CBT works. So that CBT is that you have a negative thought and you challenge it with a more positive and empowering thought.
Yep.
Right. And that's what counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists will teach you to do. But that only works on the premise that negative thought doesn't link to a negative emotion, which from what I've experienced with my clients is pretty rare. Right. For most people, I would say maybe in your high achievers category. So your athletes, your high-end business people and your high achievers, maybe those people have less negative emotions in their body at times, maybe. But for most people, I think that the negative thought will link to a negative emotion. But just to recap what you said, yes, the first step is to identify the negative emotion. So what that means is you need to be able to feel it in your body. So you need to know, is it in my head? Is it in my chest? Is it in my stomach? Can I feel it in my arms? Is it all over? And then you need to be able to identify, what does it feel like? Like, is it tight? Is it heavy? Right? So the purpose of that is just identifying it. Yeah. So if you get the labeling wrong, you're like, well, I don't know if it's tight or it's heavy or it's a bit of both. Doesn't matter. The purpose of describing it is just so you can really isolate where it is in your body, so that emotion knows that you want to connect with it.
Understood. So once that negative thought triggers a negative emotion, and you start to identify with whereabouts in your body you feel it, and then you can describe it as like you said, a dull ache, or how does it feel? Is it tightness? Is it a piercing feeling, or however you want to describe that? So at that point, is that where the past memory is triggered at that point? And how do you identify that part of it?
So it's different for different people. So what I would do next is, once you feel the emotion, you need to communicate with it. So you need to say to it, show me the problem that this links to, right? So for example, say I'm feeling angry. I would say, I would talk to the anger. I'd say, anger, show me the problem that's made me angry. Right. And then if there's a memory, it will show you. If there's no memory, then you'll get a blank screen in your mind. Right. Okay. So I'll go down the memory one first. Yep. If there's a memory, actually, I won't go into that because that's the next step. So you just want to be able to identify if it links to a memory or if it doesn't. And there's no one better than the other. So if you get a memory, great. If you get a blank screen, great, because there's a technique for both. There's kind of an avenue to go down for both. Yeah,
right. Okay, so if we go down the memory side of things, which it'll be a recollection of a time and space where you experienced a negative situation or a traumatic experience. Is that typically common in your with your clients?
Yeah, so there's grades of how intense an experience is, but it could be something could have made you angry, but only a little bit angry, but nonetheless, it still triggered the anger, or something could have made you feel really angry. So there's kind of different grades of the emotion, but it doesn't matter how intense it is. We still need to go back to the memory and correct it.
Yeah. So, but what's interesting is that your mind in a lot of cases shows you a depiction or a picture of something that's relatable to that particular moment in time where you experienced anger or whatever that a negative emotion is. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So if you say anxiety, show me the problem that's made me anxious, it will show you the person who made you anxious, or the scenario that did, or the situation you're in, or even if it was yourself, you're sitting there in your own thoughts, but it'll link to the memory that made you anxious. Or if you're depressed, you would say, depression, show me the problem that's making me depressed. Yeah. And it might show you something going on at work, or with your finances, or with a partner or a family member or a friend. It will show you the problem. Same with feeling low confidence. You could say low confidence, show me the problem that's making me feel low confidence. And right. It might see your body image, or it might be your education level, or the job, or the money you're earning, or whatever. But it will show you a memory of the problem that's making you feel that feeling.
So what's the benefit of seeing the memory, or seeing that picture in your mind as to where that problem is or that challenge is. What's the benefit of that?
I think that some people are visual learners. So rather than reading words on a bit of paper, seeing where the actual problem come from, a lot of people learn better like that, because, you know, a word can say, a picture can paint 1,000 words or whatever the saying is. But I just think a visual representation just reminds you, it's like, oh, of course, that's where it's come from. Now I know. So it kind of really grounds your thinking back to the root cause of that problem.
Right. So I'd imagine if you're a sort of left brain or right brain thinker, if you're more sort of analytical or more intuitive or, like you said, picture based and creative, then that would probably determine whether you would get a blank screen or a memory. Would that be correct?
I don't know if that's how it works. I don't probably have the greatest explanation for why different people get different things. Maybe you're right what you're saying. I actually don't know the answer on that. Mm-hmm. But what I do know is that our birthdays and star signs can play a role on how well we can see the memory. So, for example, I'm a Sagittarius, which is a fire element. So fire element don't visualize that clearly. So if I were to visualize the room I'm sitting in, if I was to close my eyes and try and visualize it, I might be only be able to see it like a 2 out of 10, right? So it wouldn't be very clear. And I do this every day and it's still only that clear, like a 2 out of 10. Mm-hmm. But if you get someone who's a water sign, so people that are Pisces or Cancerian or Scorpios, they're a water element, those people can visualize as clearly as the room. So I've asked them how clear, and they're like 10 out of 10. They can see it super clear.
Wow.
Right. So the point I'm making is that when I go back to a memory, it's not a very clear vision in my head, but I can strongly sense it. Like I know that in that memory, it was this person, or I know in that memory, I was at that place. And there's no doubt in my mind that I know that that's the correct answer. I just can't see it that clearly.
Uh-huh. So in the event that you don't see a past memory, you would get what you call a blank screen, which is, it could be anything. In my experience, it could be just like almost like text on a blank computer screen, or just a phrase of some nature.
That's right. Yeah. So say, for example, I've got anxiety and I say, anxiety, show me the problem that's making me anxious. And this is obviously with my eyes closed. And then in my the screen of my mind, I just see a blank screen. So what you do at that point, there's 2 ways of doing it. The first way is you just imagine switching off the anxiety. So literally imagine there's a light switch and it literally just flicks it off.
Yep.
And then you need to ask yourself, how would I feel if that anxiety was completely switched off? I'd feel really light. I'd feel really safe. I'd feel really confident, happy. It's whatever you feel the answer is. There's no, your answer might be different to mine, but it's whatever you feel the answer is. Yeah. And whatever you feel the answer is, say if I turn this tight anxiety feeling off, how would I feel? I'd feel really loose. Like my chest would feel like a belt's been loosened and I'd feel really relaxed. So then the next step you do is you imagine that happening in the future. You imagine yourself feeling really relaxed in the future. And then what happens next is the same way when someone yawns, it makes you want to yawn. So there's these things in our body called mirror neurons. And basically what they do is they mirror what someone else is feeling back into your own body in the same location. So it's the same way when you walk into a room and someone's down, it makes you feel down. Or when you walk into the room and someone's up and it makes you feel up. So it's the same way empathy works. So what happens is when you imagine yourself feeling good or relaxed in the future, it then mirrors back into your body and it turns on the feeling that you've imagined happening in the future. It turns that on and it turns off the negative one. Right. So that's the first way of doing it. So you just literally imagine switching it off. Whatever the good feeling is, then imagine that happening in the future. The second way is quite similar. So say you're feeling anxiety, you then ask yourself, what's the opposite of anxiety? Mm-hmm. So the polar opposite might be calm, relaxed, peaceful, happy, confident, whatever you feel it is. And then you imagine that happening in the future. So it's literally just different words for the same thing. One is switching it off, one is thinking of an opposite, but they both guide you to the ballpark of where the answer lies.
Yeah. So for those that are listening and wondering, how does that work? Because it does sound very simplistic on the surface of it all, but maybe some people find it hard to connect where who's reading what emotion and how does it counteract a particular feeling or emotion at that time. So can you explain in the best way you can what's happening at that time? Because you mentioned obviously the mirror neurons and things like that. So what else is going on which is counterbalancing, say if we pick anxiety, for example, what's actually happening within the mind-body connection at that time?
So what I think is happening is that emotions are meant to just come into our body and then leave, right? So they're not meant to stay and get stuck. When they stay and get stuck, they're doing that because they want you to learn a lesson. So think of emotions as like messengers. So they've come to tell you something and you've got to know how to communicate with them. But the problem is the brain doesn't know how to communicate with the emotions. They speak different languages. But the subconscious knows how to talk to them. So the subconscious is basically, once your eyes are closed, you're in the subconscious world where all your feelings and sensations are. And it's where all the memories are, and it's where you use your imagination to imagine things in the future. But to simplify it, your subconscious knows how to talk to emotions. So once the emotion comes into your body, it wants you to learn a lesson. And think of lessons as opposites or do's and don'ts, right? So anxiety is all about safety, right? So anxiety is trying to tell you that something potentially dangerous may happen in the future, whether it be your physical danger, mental or emotional danger, spiritual danger. There's something bad that may happen. Now, even though your brain may know that, may know what it's talking about, the brain can't communicate with it. So the anxiety thinks, oh, you're not listening to me. I'm going to have to get louder. So I'm going to start yelling. And then the anxiety gets more intense. It goes, still not listening. All right, I'm going to get more intense and turn up more frequently. So then it starts yelling at you all the time during the day, and you're feeling the anxiety more intensely and more frequently than you should, right? But what the anxiety wants to know, it wants you to communicate with it through the subconscious, so with your eyes closed, either in the memory or creating a vision, because then it knows that you understand the opposite. It knows that you know what the life lesson is. And once it goes, oh, great, Adrian knows what the lesson is now. He knows what he needs to do differently so that I don't have to get triggered again. Oh, great, anxiety, let's all leave. And then the anxiety leaves your body, right? So that's what I think is happening on a cellular level, is it's staying there until it feels that you've learned the lesson, and until it learns that you know how to communicate with it on its level. You've got to communicate to emotions on an emotional level through the emotion brain. Right? So I feel that a lot of people know the answers in their brain. They know what the answer is and they know what to do, but there's no brain emotion connection, and that's where they're going wrong. And it's so simple to fix it. Literally close your eyes and transfer that information in your brain down into your subconscious through the memories by recreating the memories or by creating future visions. And then you're talking to the emotion on the emotion level.
Okay, great. So moving on from here, in terms of rewriting or overriding or correcting that past experience or that past memory going forward, can you explain what's happening in that moment and why that's such a critical part of the whole process?
Yeah, so when inside our subconscious is where all the memories are stored, and memories are always reenacting themselves in our life, right? So say you go through, you as a kid, you got bullied at school. That gets stored as a memory, and then that memory will keep replaying itself in your life. So everywhere you go, you either get bullied or you become the bully. But either way, you're reenacting that memory, right? So it might be at where you work, where you play sport, where you go to school, with your family, with your friends. The memory keeps reenacting. And that's the problem that people know, is they want that pattern to stop, but they don't know how to stop it. So that's why with this technique, we've got to go back to that memory and correct it. We've got to basically recreate the memory. So what happens is when we correct the memory gets deactivated. So imagine a memory is encapsulated by an emotional charge. By recreating the memory, it turns off the emotional charge. And when the emotional charge gets turned off, it turns off the emotion inside of our body. But it also, whatever the correction is, so say, for example, you got bullied at school, the opposite of the correction for the bully would be to be kind, to be inclusive and to be nice. So then you need to recreate that memory and imagine that actually happened. And once you recreate that memory, it then starts manifesting into your future. So essentially what happens at that point is your subconscious tells your brain to tell your eyes to look out for kindness and people who are going to be nice. and people who are going to be inclusive and treat you well, right? But all that happens subconsciously. You're not even aware of it. But you'll just notice you'll start making different decisions. You'll be drawn to different people. Instead of going this way where you keep getting bullied or you're in toxic relationships and things like that, you'll start to feel energetically you're not as drawn to them, and you'll start being drawn to other people. Like, oh, these people over here support me, they encourage me, they're nice, they're doing all these things. I want to spend more time with those people. So on the surface level, it looks like, oh, I'm just spending time with these people now. But subconsciously, there's so much more going on. It's actually because you've corrected that original memory where the problem first happened, which has told your subconscious, which has told your brain to tell your eyes to look out for nicer people, and now you're deciding to hang around with nicer people.
That's pretty powerful stuff, because that can really change the environment that you're in, whether it be in a relationship, whether it be at work, with your children, with your partner. That could really have a profound effect on everything that happens within your life. And then it would also make you quite immediately aware of some of the challenges which you need to be dealing with at that moment, which can be quite confronting, which is probably circling back to our original conversation at the outtake of this interview, is that people are experiencing an upheaval of a multitude of different events or circumstances or events that are happening in their life, things that are happening in their life, which are creating that emotional turmoil that they're in. So they're realizing that this has been a problem for quite some time. I'm now finally exposed to it, and I don't know how to deal with that at this moment. Does that make sense? It's kind of like it's bringing everything to the surface, and so now you know that you've got a situation that if it's something going on with your children, or with your partner, and that thing is staring you at the face, you need to be dealing with that right at this moment and correcting it. And that could mean that you're either changing yourself or taking yourself away from that particular situation, so you no longer experience it anymore. Is that what you're seeing for your clients that you're seeing at the moment as well?
Yeah, 100%, definitely.
All right, brilliant. So look, I think that I want to encourage people to come and see you and get to understand the methodology that you use in your techniques that are really life techniques and resilience techniques that they can use. Because the thing that I'm re-downloading at the moment from this conversation is that knowing these strategies and tools and techniques is something that once they see you, they can then learn these tools and keep re-implementing these tools in every aspect of their life. So and to go back to the beginning of this conversation, it's more than just talking about it now. It's more than just becoming aware of the situation. It's actually correcting it on the go, on the fly, whenever this situation occurs in the future. So, which I think is super powerful, and something that you rightfully said, we were just never taught by our parents. We're never taught this in schools. It's such a limited amount of information that comes through, which has a practical application in life. So I want to encourage people to seek you out and to coach with you, to read your books. I mean, it's just such powerful stuff that I think everyone needs to know. So
can I just jump in there, Adrian, before you go to the next part, because you've just triggered something inside of me. Is that I just want to let people know, because I probably haven't told this part of my story in a while, but I suffered when I was younger really badly with depression. Like they measured it like an 18 or a 19 out of 20 on the depression scale, and they thought that I was suicidal and thought I was going to hurt myself. And I told them that I wasn't. I was just in a hole, and I just wanted some help. But everywhere I was going wasn't helping me how I wanted to be helped. And where I learned this technique from was this holistic doctor in the city. And if anyone wants to look it up, it's called Hakomi, Hakomi. It's based on an ancient spiritual healing technique. But anyway, this doctor took me through this technique in one session, turned off that depression. Like I was suffering with that for, 5 to 10 years. I was suffering with that depression on and off. And this doctor cleared it out in one go. Like it literally told my cells and I walked out of that session feeling high. I felt that good. I remember thinking to myself, I want to feel like this all the time. And then I stopped seeing the doctor because I was feeling good. And then life carried on, and I got myself into a lot of trouble and more things happened. But I basically ended up with really, really bad anxiety. And I didn't have anxiety as a kid. I only developed later in life, and it turned into panic attacks. And for anyone who's ever had a panic attack, I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy, because you are convinced you're about to die, and every breath's your last one. It's like someone's pushing your chest down and suffocating you and covering your mouth all at once. And it's just the most horrible experience. But this technique released that from my body as well. It got rid of the most severe panic attacks, the worst kind of depression. I had the lowest self-esteem growing up, like much lower than a lot of my friends. And that's what forced me to learn all this stuff, because I just felt like I was so out of place, and I didn't have a normal level of confidence like everyone. And this technique helped me with that, right? So this technique freed me from my emotional prison. I used this technique so much on myself. Before I started helping anyone else, I worked intensely on myself. And I got to the point where I reached the emotional freedom. Like I had broken through and released all those negative emotions, and I felt like a brand new person. So although I'm talking quite technical today on how the technique works and the ins and outs of it, that's just because I've spent the last 7 years working intensely with clients and refining it and getting better at wording it and explaining how it works. But at the original time when I started using it on myself, it turned my life around completely. I'm a different person today, what I am today, than I was in my younger years, just from this technique alone. Wow. So I just want to give the people the hope and insight that that's what's possible. And I've helped many, many clients in the last 7 years with this technique who are on the edge of the cliff or suffering badly in their life. And it's because of this technique. That's what gives my coaching the edge compared to where people may go and do other things, is because I've got a very specific technique that other people don't have, right? Everyone wants to learn how to control their emotions, but it's like telling someone to go and paint a wall and not giving them the paintbrush. They can see what needs to be done, but without the tool, you can't fix it. And I've got the tool, and that's what we've been talking about today. So I really want to encourage people to reach out, and it doesn't even have to be to me, but at least get your journey started, counseling and then psychology, and then start looking at alternative ways. But psychology and psychiatry is not the final destination. It's not the final. If they're not helping you get to where you want to go, don't feel defeated and feel like you're at a loss because they're not helping you. They're just the mid stations. There's more steps to do after that. So I just encourage you to making progress along those steps, and know that a technique like this exists. Because if someone had told this to me when I was younger, that would have been all the hope I needed to keep going.
Brilliant. Well, you just summed it up absolutely brilliantly there. So thank you very much for that. It's always a pleasure talking to you, buddy. I think that from our conversation today to the last training that we did, I can already tell that your skills have leveled up even more so than the last time we spoke. And it really shows just what a true professional and compassionate person you are. So I just want to say thank you for your time today, and I really appreciate this chat.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure getting to spend time with you, and I just feel that when our minds combine, we come up with some really good answers and have some great conversations. So all good.
All right, mate. Until we meet again, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye for now.